So obviously, even though the most common stories about vampires seem to be attached to Eastern Europe, it is not the first place where we find vampire type characters. There is, especially in South America, a pretty deep tradition of people who are part bat and also part blood drinkers. Here from the Toba people of Gran Chaco Canyon in Argentina tells us about a hero, of course, as is usually the case in these stories, a trickster hero who is a bat or Batman or eternal bat who taught the people everything they needed to know about how to be humans. The Great Darkness is one of the cataclysms which will occur at the end of the world, which the Papokuva Gorani feel to be imminent. Someday our great father will unleash the eternal bat, which will devour the sun and the moon, and darkness will set in. The same theme exists in Chiriguano folklore. The people of ancient South American cultures seem to have a pretty common form of a bat character, and as is usually the case in these heroes slash totems slash tricksters, it could take many forms, but the bat is certainly one of them and a very recurrent one. Kind of as so as is described here, a creature of God, superior to us, but different from us. The number of these creators may vary, and they might be more or less related, as is often the case, of course. Also in American folklores, indigenous American folklores, anyway. Um, it could be, like I said, several kinds of animals, frogs, crickets, and whatnot, and they can also have their own people as well. So they could be an entire group of frog people, an entire group of cricket people, and, a jaguar, and whatever. And of course, that is largely due to the existence of bats, especially New World leaf-nosed bats, such as this one here, that is also a vampire, because it drinks blood. Leaf-nosed bats are the only ones that drink blood, and they only exist in South America. There are three different species. This one is the most common. The other two are very rare. So this is the best example of this bat that we can find. They're very small and obviously very nocturnal, as you can expect. They mostly drink blood from cattle, not from humans, because humans are weird and they don't have very predictable lives as opposed to cattle. The bat usually so sneaks up on sleeping animals and they just bite into their skin and start drinking their blood from there. That being said, we don't know much about the two other ones, the two bats that are more rare. So it's possible that there are other more subtleties about their lifestyle. We know that there are some encounters between the leaf-nosed bats and birds as well. So they are pretty indiscriminate as far as the animals are concerned. The only thing is that they eat blood, and they are documented very early on from Cortez in the early colonial era, where the bats are reportedly attacking people or reportedly biting people, or at least trying to anyway, which no one has no one has a good take on until the Europeans bring livestock, their own cattle, to South America, and eventually find these bats drinking on the blood of their cattle. But still, no catching, no scientific proof of who they are until much later. But that bringing in European cattle, meaning much larger numbers, and especially much larger numbers that are maintained for the very specific purpose of making meat, was probably instrumental in developing the population of these bats in South America, which would have otherwise have a very limited amount of food. And in the context of these three different species, that one was able to survive, especially from cattle, is probably a direct result of colonial occupation in South America. The first time that these bats are positively identified as blood drinkers is in Darwin in the 19th century, and therefore a very a very recent development. But the stories are more important, of course, because this is a folklore class. And there are other bat characters. For example, this one in Brazil, and the Sertão of San Vicente, which lies toward the Araguaia. There is the Bat Mountain. It is in a big cave with an entrance from below, while high above there is a kind of window. There in ancient times dwelt the Kupabiab, the beings of human shape but with bat wings. And Apenai had shot a deer near the Bat Rock and camped there overnight because it was already late. While he slept, the Kupabiab came flying and crushed his skull with their anchor axes. Where he remained away too long, his relatives followed his tracks and found this corpse. Round it, they also saw many tracks, but no traces of the arrival or departure of the malefactors. So, cattle or a deer that is being left alone and that becomes attacked by these bad people while they sleep. So very common description of the kinds of bats and leaf-nosed bats that we know in South America. And besides the stories, we also have iconography of bat characters, such as this one right here. You may be able to see that those are bats hanging within the ears or earrings. Now, whatever this particular form of art prefigures, the South American art, this is a bat characters that has bat animals within its headdress at the very least. And certainly, this is the most common way in which we will see those bats as living close to people, surrounded by people, and having perhaps a little bit of access to the supernatural themselves. Best example appears in the Popol Vuh, the Maya kind of holy book, if you will, described here in the like translation. Now they were put inside Bat House. So talking about two twins, twins of the Maya folklore, who are the heroes of the folklore, moving through the underworld in this context. And they were put inside the Bat House in the underworld with bats alone inside the house. So the house of snatch bats, monstrous beasts, their snouts like knives, the instruments of death. To come before these is to be finished off at once. So these are very dangerous bats, although according to a footnote in this particular translation, they are not bad bats, but bats from the underworld. So they are kind of supernatural bats already. When they were inside, they just slept in their blowgun. They, the twins anyway, slept in their blowgun. They were not bitten by the members of the household, not bitten by the bats. But this was where they gave one of themselves up because of the snatch bat that came down. He came along just as one of them showed himself. They did it because it was actually what they were asking for, what they had in mind. And all night the bats are making noise. Eek, eek, they said. And they say it all night. Then it let up a little. The bats were no longer moving around, so there one of the boys crawled to the end of the blowgun since Spalenke said, Unapu, can you see how long it is till dawn? Well, perhaps I should look to see how long it is, he replied. So he kept trying to look out of the muzzle of the blowgun. He tried to see the dawn. Nocturnal animals, bats that are seeking to bite humans, and especially the hero humans in this context, they are able to hide from the bats, um, to be able to survive. So, in the grand scheme of things, so the first translation, the first transcriptions of the Popol Vuh start to appear in the 18th century, right about the time when we have those the stories of Eastern Europe. Although the time when the Popol Vuh itself was written was in the very early years of Spanish occupation in Mexico, middle of the 16th century, maybe a little bit later, but probably in the 16th century until it became more widely available as time went. The particular edition of the Popol Vuh that I'm reading here has this little side note as well. The head of a bat that is a heraldic emblem of the lords of the classic Maya city of Copan, with the profile of a leaf-nosed bat facing left at the center. The bat's head, itself a hieroglyph, forms the first syllable of a phrase that continues to the right of the bat's mouth and runs clockwise around its head from there. The first full word is, I'm not going to pronounce this one, a term for the brown-backed solitaire and the name of the ruling lineage of Kapan. Then comes the title of the ruler himself, Chopal Hawa, Lord of the Holy Council. So the leaf nose bat, as you can see, very reminiscent of the picture that I was showing earlier from the face and the nose. This is a pretty clear echo to this kind of animal, and certainly very well respected in Mayan folklore, to the fact that it became an emblem, a totem for a city in Mexico. So let's also remember that there are very many of these stories where humans come from caves. So they exist from the cave and they spring out of the caves to become human. And obviously the bats can show the way out of the caves. In this context, this is a very common representation of what the bats are doing. Later on in history, we also have other traditional stories that appear pretty much everywhere around these blood drinker people, although they are not like the vampires of today. So, for example, there's the Baba Yaga, who exist in Slavic folklore into Russia and most of Eastern Europe outside of Romania. Baba Yaga is a little bit of a witch of some sort, or I mean, it is represented here. You can see it as a witch, but you know, it is a little bit more complicated than that. Again, we are in the domain of the spirits. Example of a Baba Yaga story: the maiden remained with them. Their heroes respected and loved her and considered her as their own sister. The way was, they used to go hunting, and she was always at home, took care of the housekeeping, cooked for them, washed for them. Now a Baba Yaga, Boneleg, began to come to the huts and suck the blood of the merchant's daughter. The moment the heroes went to hunt, Baba Yaga was there. Whether it was long or short, the fair maidens fell face away. She grew thin and poor. Right. So, well, a person is bitten by a blood-thirsty witch, and they start to become vampirical in their face. And this is a forest spirit of some sort, a guardian of water, technically speaking. Usually have sisters, kind of a coven, if you will, of Baba Yagas, and kind of hunting for people from the forest. One last aspect that is probably worth mentioning as far as the many vampire stories that are out there would be the Lamia or Empusa, kind of a shape-shifting female in Greek history that is that has a single leg. So the Russian Baba Yaga has a single leg here, bone leg or bird's leg. This one also has a single leg, sometimes made out of metal and sometimes represented as this snake leg to the right there, or perhaps a dragon leg. I don't know. Ampusas, such as commonly called lamias or momolukias, they have amorous appetites, but their chief appetite is for human flesh, and they snare their intended victims with the bait of love. But at this, the bride said, "Stop! This is horrible. Get away!" and appeared to be sick with disgust at what he said. And I dare say added a sneer at philosophers for always talking nonsense. But when the golden goblets and the seeming silver all proved to be airy nothing, and took flight till the feast, cupbearers and cooks, all this scrumptious array, vanished under the convicting reproof of Apollonius, the ghost seemed to weep and beseech him not to torment it, nor force it to confess its true nature. But he was peremptory and would not desist, and at last she said she was an Empusa, and glutted Menipus with pleasures in order to devour his flesh, for her wont was to feed upon young and beautiful bodies, because their blood was fresh and pure. So, young women, blood drinkers, part snake, part dragon, maybe. I don't know. These are writings here interpreted in the Middle Ages as the snake dragon thing. Uh, um, of course, very reminiscent of the sirens, and the mermaids are described in Ulysses, or as many people have pointed out in the message board. The earliest stories of Lamia portrayed her as kind of a queen in Libya. We've mentioned Libya as well before, who had an affair with Zeus. We've mentioned that Zeus likes to have affairs. We also mentioned that Hera would punish this person, and in his case, of course, Hera punishes Lamia, and as a result, because so she kills our children, and as a result, Lamia seeks to kidnap children and to take their blood as kind of a vengeance against Hera to kind of avenge her own sadness and despair from losing her children to the gods. And eventually she becomes ugly and monstrous in this shape. There are also other stories where she is portrayed as a daughter of Poseidon, but of course this is part of the interpretation process, also mentioned previously in this class. So, best we can get to this, vampires are not like us. They live at day, they live at night, we live in the day, they eat, they drink blood, we eat food, we sleep in our beds, they sleep in coffins, we inhabit houses, they inhabit castles, they take care of, they eat our children, we take care of our children, we're regular, they're fancy, we reproduce through sex, they reproduce through blood, directly blood drinking. So they're kind of like us, but not quite like us. And they also end up having somewhat supernatural powers as a result. They are super strong. They defeat death and all that. Uh, but we have certainly quite a variety of visions of how the vampires come together into the very recent era, as opposed to the kind of traditional versions that exist a little bit everywhere. But because they have these almost supernatural access, sometimes vampires can be portrayed as being a little bit aristocratic, like the Gothic image of the Count Dracula, so not the Voivode from Vlad the Impaler, kind of this European title of nobility that exists in Dracula. So they could be a little bit superior, maybe a little bit better off than the average human, and that also makes them fit into somewhat of a class warfare, maybe a racial warfare between us and the vampires, depending on how the story is told. But one thing we will not disagree with is that vampires are real, and the reading for this week has this modern real life community of vampires, and they also come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, within which they do not discriminate against one another. The umbrella term real vampire community is used to describe modern vampires or real vampires, terms that refer interchangeably to people who consume human and or animal blood, sanguinarian, absorb psychic energy, psychic vampires, or psyvamp, or both, hybrid, and do so out of a need that, according to my study participants, begins to manifest around puberty and derives from the lack of subtle energies their bodies produce. This self-described nature is a condition for which they claim to be given neither a choice nor the freedom to change. So I'll let you read the article to refer to that one, and think about the kinds of vampires that you see in your day-to-day basis.